Yo, what is going on YouTube? It's Dubpace here, and thank you for clicking on my Blackwing Lair tanking guide. I have put timestamps to each of the boss fights in the description below. I hope you enjoy. Okay, welcome again to the video. The very first boss we're going to be going over is Razorgore the Untamed, and as you might already know, this fight starts with an event where a bunch of different mobs spawn over a long period of time. It's like 4 or 5 minutes. There's two main strategies people do. Either everybody stacks up on this platform, which is the strategy that my guild does, and then we place a tank on one ramp and then another tank on the other ramp on the other side. You might be utilizing the four corner strategy. They're both good, but the main thing to know as a tank, either in a corner or on the ramp, is the target prioritization. You want to make sure that you're picking up the dragon spawn first, because they are the hardest hitting and have the most health, and then the legionnaires second because they're the middle ground, and then the mages. You probably don't even need to mess with the mages at all because it's very likely that your melee DPS are going to be DPSing them down so fast you can barely even touch them, let alone get aggro on them. I normally do switch to a mage here and there to try to help the DPS, but only once I've already gotten aggro on everything else that has priority around me. It's possible that you might be considered the main tank for this fight, and you will likely need to take control of the orb to crack the last 2 or 3 eggs. Whoever is controlling the orb when the last egg gets popped, that person will have infinite aggro on Razorgore. So we have our bear tank doing this here because the bear tank has an insane amount of armor and health, and then the Fury Prot warriors fight for threat underneath. And you'll see that I will be the person that picks up the boss after the main tank is hit with Conflagrate. Just like the boss from UBRS, General Dracosath. It's just like that fight in Phase 2. Let's skip there now. Alright, so we just jumped forward in time here, and the final egg is just about to be destroyed. I always call in Discord at this point just to let everyone know, the raid know, that they need to be moving to their designated position, which for us is over to the right here. And then Razorgore will just be tanked facing away from the raid. Note, I did just use a free action potion because Razorgore has a AoE War Stomp stun, and I'm just pumping for threat underneath all the DPS here. As soon as I do get threat during the Conflagrate, I will put on a shield just to mitigate some of the damage, and then as soon as the Conflagrate wears off and flips back to the main tank, I should, if I'm playing well, switch back to dual wield to continue generating more threat. Razorgore comes back, I put the shield back on. This is just to help out the healers. If you have DPS that are pulling really hard underneath you, you might not need to do this. It's just the way that I do it. Try it out. Okay, the next fight we're going to be talking about, this is a big one. This is a huge roadblock for a lot of guilds. Vaelastrasz the Untamed. Infinite rage, infinite mana, infinite energy. So how do you tank it? Pop Recklessness right in the beginning. Use a fast 1.3 speed dagger. I'm using Alcor's Sunraiser here. Tell your DPS to pump as hard as possible. If you can, you want to avoid doing the tank swap. I pop my Recklessness. When Recklessness wears off and everything feels stable, I also pop Death Wish here in just a second, and just make sure you've got Heroic Strike queued up this whole time. You're using Revenge on cooldown, you're using Bloodthirst on cooldown, and you're pumping as hard as possible. Personally, I wear a mix of fire resistance gear along with threat gear. I can post an armory link to the exact gear that I'm wearing in this fight below, but I am using Alcor's Sunraiser, and you just let your DPS pump as hard as possible. Try to avoid getting to the tank swap phase. If you need to go to the tank swap, it's pretty obvious. Just have your off tank as the number 2 on the threat during the Burning Adrenaline phase. If you do end up with Burning Adrenaline like I do here, don't hesitate to hearth out to preserve your world buffs that you spent hours getting. All right, the next fight that we're going to be taking a look at here is Broodlord Lashlayer. In my opinion, this is the hardest hitting boss currently in the game. He has a nasty mortal strike that hits for a ton, usually 6,000 plus. And you'll notice I'm respecting the fight here. I'm wearing a mix of threat gear and mitigation gear to increase my overall hit points. I'm wearing a shield. I pop a Greater Stone Shield potion, and I start generating threat right away, facing him away from the melee DPS because he does have a nasty cleave. The off tanks are dual wielding, and they are standing in front of the boss to get cleaved. The aggro flips here, goes to the primary off-tank, Andrew R, and now that the threat is on Andrew, Andrew puts a shield on, and then I switch to dual wielding, and now I'm generating threat underneath Andrew. And then it flips like this between the tanks, but the longer that the fight goes on, the closer the DPS and the tanks get, because the threat is constantly being reduced by Broodlord's knockback. So all that I can say is burn. Don't do the slow strategy. I don't think that the slow strategy works where you like wand in the beginning. It's not great. It can cause a lot of problems. So just instruct your melee DPS to have a limited invulnerability potion ready. If they do get aggro towards the end where the threat does get dicey, they can use that limited invulnerability potion to save themselves, save their buffs, and reduce the number of deaths. This is a hard-hitting fight. Respect it with some mitigation gear, and you won't regret it. I've spoken a little bit about how for each fight in BWL, you want to tailor your gear for that fight. For Firemaw, this is another fight where I really suggest that you respect the mechanics of Flame Buffet. This is the hardest boss in BWL. So much stuff can go wrong. And I will say you want to be aiming for 315 fire resist fully buffed. So with the fire resist totem. This lets the Flame Buffet stacks wear off naturally. And I also suggest the wonderful trinket, which I will link over here. And then if you get too many stacks, like 7 or 8 stacks, activate that trinket and it helps the stacks drop as well. I'm wearing a mix of FR gear and threat gear here because I am fully buffed up with the UBRS fire resist buff as well. Jumping into the fight itself here, we have a Hunter Pullet, and I stand in the position that you see. We do have the main tank healers covered by my raid frames here to the left, and they are line of sighting by using this pillar to not get the Flame Buffet stacks at all. And then we have the off tank standing over behind here, and the off tank will come in when Wing Buffet is about to happen at about 4 seconds. The off tank will taunt, and then I stop auto attacking because I don't want to accidentally rip threat here. And then after the Wing Buffet goes off, Firemaw turns right back to the tank. This whole fight is about perfecting this swap where the off tank comes in and then taunts at the perfect timing for the Wing Buffet. You don't accidentally pull aggro back because you continue attacking. Because if you get hit with the Wing Buffet, then Firemaw might start running everywhere. You really, really, really want to avoid that from happening. So it's important for the off tank to ensure that if they can control it, to not let that taunt get resisted. So if the taunt does get resisted, the off tank needs to use Mocking Blow or Challenging Shout, the AoE taunt. Alternatively, it's also a good idea to prioritize the Nat Pagel's fishing reel, which gives an extra 10% hit chance for spells, and then you can give that to the tank, and the tank can use that before they taunt. You'll also notice here the Flame Buffet stacks can stack up even when you are wearing the max fire resist. Just communicate with your healers what's going on. Work with your off tank. Be vocal in Discord. Talk it up so that people really know what's going on, what's happening. And if anything goes wrong, don't forget that Firemaw is tauntable. You can sometimes save a bad situation where Firemaw is running around just by taunting, and then you're the highest on threat. Good luck on this boss. I can make a whole video just on this boss. It is one of the hardest ones. Now, for the next Drake, this is Ebonroc. Ebonroc is just all about tank communication. You need to work with the 2 off tanks that you have positioned on the sides. Try to position yourself, if you're the person pulling, into the corner. And it's just important to work out how are you going to tell your off tanks to taunt, and how do you know who is next in the rotation to taunt. It's also very important for you to immediately say if taunt was resisted, and then you can let the other off tank taunt that doesn't have taunt on cooldown. But the idea is, if you don't know already, every time that Shadow of Ebonroc, you'll see it pop up on my DBM in the middle. Every time Shadow of Ebonroc gets casted on a tank, you need another tank to taunt it off, because every time Ebonroc hits that tank that has Shadow of Ebonroc, it heals Ebonroc for a huge amount, like tens of thousands of healing. So this fight, like I said, it's just all about communication. The way that we do it is that if your taunt is off of cooldown, you'll just say in Discord, you'll say, Dub has next taunt. And then when the current tank gets the affliction, the Shadow of Ebonroc, then the current tank says taunt. And then whoever said that I'm next, then they do it. And then someone else that has it up, they will say, I'm next taunt. And then the same process. And we just keep going. It sort of gets messed up in some ways because of the wing buffet. You can't have just like a perfect set rotation, because sometimes wing buffet will make the aggro drop and go to one of the other tanks that was number 2 on threat. So just the way that we do it is just we say, I have next. And then when it's time for that person to taunt, you just say taunt. Other than that, this is a tank and spank. You just work out the communication and you're good. Loot Pinata. Good luck on the trinket. Moving on to the last and the easiest of the 3 Drakes, this is Flamegor. So Flamegor's unique ability is the enrage that the hunters can trank shot off, and I pull it to the same spot where we killed a previous boss, except instead of tanking it in the corner, I just put my back to the wall, and then I have my off tanks here with their backs up against the other wall. Flamegor does still have the wing buffet mechanic, similar to Firemaw, so the off-tank does need to taunt about 4 to 3 seconds before wing buffet goes off. And if you accidentally get wing buffet, which I did there, then all you need to do is just taunt it back to make it go back to you. Other than that, I can talk a little bit about the gear that you wear for this fight. For me, it's just full threat gear. I've found that Flamegor does not hit very hard. There's not a lot of raid damage, so your raid healers aren't going to have much trouble keeping you up, even if you are taking a little bit more damage. The only thing that I'll say about that is if you are wearing full threat gear like I am here, just be ready with your shield macro in case if one of the hunters is slow with the trank shot, because the only way that you're truly going to die is if the enrage is up and you're still dual wielding, and maybe you don't have greater stone shield potion popped, which you should, but in general, this is a tank and spank. Enjoy the free loot and prepare yourself for the big dog next. All right, who let the dogs out? It's Chromaggus time. Back in vanilla, this was actually considered the biggest roadblock fight in BWL, but in Classic, this is a medium strength fight. I do start out the fight in full threat gear, and I am dual wielding as well. Some people are scared of the size of the dog, so I see they're wearing like full mitigation gear with a shield. You don't need that. I should have popped a greater stone shield potion at the beginning, but I didn't. And you'll see here, even with dual wielding with full threat gear, I did have a DPS rip aggro. The first breath is coming out right now, and the breaths are the most important things for me to cover, and I'm going to cover my response to each of the 5 different breaths that you can get in the fight right now. And I will also tell you my response to that particular breath. So for Frostburn, that's the first breath that we had. Frostburn, it reduces your attack speed, which, if you think about it, that actually reduces your threat generation. So for Frostburn, I do not put on a shield. For Corrosive Acid, if that is one of your breaths, it reduces your armor and does some damage. The armor reduction is significant. In fact, the last raid that I did not switch and put my shield on, and I paid the ultimate price. I actually died. So do respect that mechanic. Put on the shield when corrosive acid goes out and while the debuff is applied to you. There's Ignite Flesh. Ignite Flesh is a very strong damage over time, and typically I'll start with my shield on with that, and then if my health seems like it's, you know, ranging 75, 80% and above, then I will take the shield back off. If I start dropping 30% and below, I'll put the shield back on during that time. There's Incinerate, which is just a really large, flat damage attack. The main thing for this is just call it in Discord that Incinerate is coming out. When Incinerate comes out, call it, and make sure you're topped up at 100%, 90% life, and you're going to be perfectly fine. You can put a shield on if you want, and then take it right off after the damage goes out. And then lastly is the one that scares some people. They've heard, you know, murmurs that the hardest breath is Time Lapse. And Time Lapse is very simple. The way that it works is when Time Lapse goes out, it stuns you. And then Chromaggus will go to the highest threat person that did not get stunned. So the way that it works is you just have your off tank go out of line of sight, and they put their shield on, and they're at 100% health. And then everyone else stays out. Instead of line of sighting the breath, everyone else stays in, and then it should just pop right over to your off tank. The off tank brings it back into position for you, and then once time lapse wears off, then the aggro will automatically flip back to you. You don't need to do anything. It will just automatically flip back. One last thing is just the Bronze Affliction. If you get hit with the Bronze Affliction, that can stun you. It's really bad for the tank. You don't want to be stunned. I believe it prevents you from blocking, dodging, parrying. The only type of mitigation is armor. And in addition to that, you're not generating threat during that time as well, which could be a problem. So make sure that you have the Hourglass Sands 3 to 4 before you start your pull. When you do hit 20%, Chromaggus enrages, as you see here, and I do put my shield on. I should also be paying way more attention to my Greater Stone Shield Potion. You should also have Greater Stone Shield Potion up, but this is a testament to how great my raid healers are. They're keeping me up despite this misplay, and I think it's a nice idea, maybe make a weak aura so you can tell when your Greater Stone Shield Potion is up to prevent making this mistake. Other than that, you deal with whatever 2 breaths you get, and deal with the enrage when it happens with the shield, and you're good. Good luck, have fun. There's some amazing loot that drops from Chromaggus, and we still have never seen the shield, the reinforced bulwark shield, drop from Chromaggus yet in our raid. So good luck out there, my fellow tanks. And just like that, we're on the final boss of BWL. This is the Nefarian fight. Phase 1, it actually reminds me a lot of the very first fight in BWL against Razorgore. There's a bunch of ads that spawn in these 2 cubbies. As you'll see, our guild, we kill all of the ads literally in the cubby. And the reasoning here is just batching up all of these skeletons helps in the later stage of the Nef fight, where all of the skeletons are risen and they all run together. So it's easier for the mages to AoE and take care of the ads when you kill them in this manner. In terms of tanking, there's really not too much to say. I oftentimes don't even taunt or worry about the threat at all. Typically, raid DPS is high enough that this stuff dies so fast. There's not even really any tanking involved. So if you're the main tank, just make sure that on your cubby, you have a backup tank, because at the tail end of this fight, around 8 to 6 kills remaining, you'll want to start positioning and run over to where you're going to tank Nef with a few designated healers that you should work out ahead of time to come with you. Let's jump to that point now. It is definitely time for me to start moving towards the tank spot. This video, we were trying a new tank spot, so I do know that there's multiple ways and positions to put your raid. So I will say for me, this is not my favorite position, and I'll explain why. And I will also show you the other tank spot that we normally do. So I'm tanking here to the, I guess the east side. Normally I tank right here with Nefarian facing that way, and then the raid is facing the direction that I am now. With this strategy, we have the raid to the left-hand side. And the thing is there's these weird pillars, and I'm mousing over one right here. And if you accidentally get feared during this fight, which you can control the fear, I always mess this up. I am not the world's best tank. You can use Berserker Rage to prevent getting feared. You get enough 1.5 seconds of warning. But when you get feared, as you can see, it's actually pushing me outside of line of sight of the healers. My healers are running up to try to save me. So that's why I don't really like this positioning. But if you play perfectly and you're confident you're going to hit every one of those fears and you're never going to get feared, then you can use this positioning because it's a little bit better for the casters. The casters can kill the skeletons more easily and get back to DPSing as fast as possible. It's just sort of a try-hard strat. Otherwise, just face Nefarian this way, and then the raid will be over here where Nef's tail is. During the fight, not too much to say. It is very important to keep the Greater Stone Shield potion up as normal, but I do wear threat gear, and I do dual wield during this fight. The only really big exception is during certain class calls. Typically during the warrior class call, where you are forced into berserker stance, you take so much damage from Nefarian's Shadow Flame ability that I strongly suggest having a shield on to mitigate whatever damage that you can. And if it does happen that the warrior call goes out, it's not a bad idea to either use Last Stand to get an extra buffer with your health pool, or you can use Life-Giving Gem to give you an extra buffer with your health pool as well. Other class calls that it might be important to use a shield, the priest one. During the priest class call, the paladins, shamans, and druids need to be taking over all the main tank healing. And if you have a lot of superstar priests that are main tank healers, you know that the healing might be dicey during that time, since that they can only put Renew and Power Word Shield on you. There is one more very important tank mechanic to know during the class call phase of the fight, and that is if the rogue class call happens, all of the rogues are teleported in front of the tank. The best solution to this is just rotate Nefarian 180 degrees so that the tail is facing the rogues rather than the head facing the rogues. This prevents them from getting breathed on. After the call is over, just simply rotate Nefarian back. Other than that, it's a very simple class call to deal with at the 20% mark during the Nefarian fight. So we're reaching that point soon, and you'll see that the DPS sometimes will slow DPS here, depending on what the current class call is, and then sometimes we will increase DPS to push into the next phase just because we have a beneficial class call. You'll need to do this fight a few times to really fully understand when to do what, but in general, it's kind of a tank and spank. The Nefarian fight for my guild felt like a letdown originally because it's not that hard. You'd think that a big dragon like this would be much harder, but a little rinky-dink dragon, Firemaw, ended up being way harder than the Nef fight. The main things to worry about, just make sure you keep your Greater Stone Shield potion up. Make sure you try to not get feared by using Berserker Rage. And then just make sure you're generating a boatload of threat. In terms of cooldown management, if your healers can manage it, pop Death Wish right at the beginning of the fight because you're not going to have a better time to pop it. And then other than that, it should be relatively clean. This was not a super clean fight for our guild, and it's because of my positioning here, but I figured it's a good way to show you what can go wrong. Don't do what I did. And that officially concludes my BWL tanking guide. I really sincerely hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, as always, please remember to like and subscribe. And of course, if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below or hit me up on my stream or any of the social media listed below. Have a good one out there.